Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Christus, der uns selig macht, which translates to Christ, by whose all-saving light. This is a longer chorale, but for all intents and purposes it's fairly straightforward. Most of the harmony is what we would expect. There are some points of contention here where I think there are arguments to be made that we're in one key or another, but I'll talk about them when we get to those points. We have no key signature to start things off. We start with E major. We end with E major, which is interesting, but I reckon the overall tonality of this chorale is A minor, and our first chord is a 5 chord, which is E major, E, B, G sharp, and E. Passing tone in the bass, passing tone in the alto, and we get G sharp, E, B, and E, which is just taking that E major chord and inverting it, so we don't need to reiterate the Roman numeral. We then have E, D, and G sharp happening on the offbeat here, which for the most part implies a 7 chord, but I'm just going to call this D a passing tone because the chord's not entirely intact, and that resolves to A minor, A, C, A, and E, which is our tonic triad in root position. Passing tones in the lower voices before we get C, E, A, and E. That's A minor in first inversion. Again, no need to reiterate the Roman numeral. And here, A and C are both chord tones, and they both put the chord in root position, and the chord's entirely intact, unlike this E7 chord here, which is not entirely intact, which is the reason why I'm marking this one. We then have F sharp, C, A, and D. That's D7 over F sharp. We see some clear harmonic minor some clear harmonic minor, and by harmonic minor I mean melodic minor here in the bass. So this is a 4-6-5 chord, a major 4 chord, and we have G sharp, B, and E, all known chord tones happening off of the harmonic rhythm. It's 5-6-5, E7 over G sharp, and then that resolves to A minor, A, B, E, and C. This B being in a 9/8 suspension over the bass, or a 2/1 suspension, I guess technically, because the tenor resolves to the same note that the bass is singing. But regardless, this is a tonic triad, and this half cadence concludes with E major. This A right here is a 4/3 suspension. This G sharp is our chord tone, making this a 5 chord. I've been getting very tongue-tied in my videos recently. Apologies. Some of the things that I'm trying to say are a mouthful. Next phrase ends in a half cadence. You're going to see a pattern here with all of the half cadences we're getting in succession. We start things off with F, A, C, and A. That's F major, so a deceptive progression to start things off. Passing tone here in the alto before we get E, B, E, and G sharp. That's E major. That's our 5 chord. Passing 7th in the bass. And then we have C, C, E, and A, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. This F sharp's a passing tone, and then we have B, D, G sharp, and B, which is our 7 chord, G sharp diminished in first inversion. And if you've seen this pattern in the past, chances are you know what's going to happen on the next beat. In this case, it is subdivided, so we're getting it on the same beat, just on the and of it. We're going to get a tonic triad in root position, A, E, A, and C. This progression is pretty consistent across all of Bach's chorales. We then have A, F, B, and D. That is B minor 7 flat 5 over A, which is 2-4-2, and that resolves exactly where we would expect it to. G sharp, E, B, and D. It's a 5-6 chord, or more specifically 5-6-5, E7 over G sharp, and then we get ready for our cadence A, E, B, and C. Again, another 9/8 suspension, this time in the alto rather than the tenor, but still same sort of cadential idea here. But by the time we get the resolution, the bass changes to C, so we have C, E, A, and C, which is like our tonic triad in first inversion, so I'm going to call it 1-6 rather than 1, and then we cadence on E major, E, E, G sharp, and B, this A being a 4/3 suspension over the bass. Okay, looking ahead, we have another half cadence. This time, however, it's in the key of D minor, so we're looking for a point to modulate before the ending of this phrase, but I do think we stay in A minor for a little bit. Unlike our previous, or similar to our previous phrase, we start off with a 6 chord, F, C, A, and A, F major, passing seventh in the bass, passing tone in the alto before we get D, D, F, and B. That is B diminished over D, which is 2, 6. So 6 going to 2, normative progression. We like seeing those because they are expected in a tonal work. And then we have E, C, G, and C. So instead of resolving to 5, which we would expect with the E and I guess G natural, but we would expect G sharp, we see a 3-6 chord, C major, which is functioning as a sub 4, 5. And with this interesting movement from 3 here back to 6, F, C, G, and A, this G being a suspension. We know that 6 is being implied, but actually what happens on the offbeat here, I think actually, I'm going to walk that back and say that we have kind of a double suspension figure here. One is resolving up and one is resolving down, F, D, F, and A. So 6 is actually resolving, or 3 is not actually resolving to 6, it's resolving to 4, 6, which they're basically the same chord, both in function and in content. Their only difference is C versus D. So I do think this is where we go to the key of D minor. This is a 1-6 chord, and the rest of the phrase makes sense with that context in mind. C sharp, A, E, and A is A major over C sharp. That's our 5 chord in first inversion. We have a passing seventh in the melody before we get D, A, E, and F. Bach loves this 9/8 suspension in the alto over a D minor chord, and we get a resolution to that D here, which would give us our tonic, D, A, D, and F, and then we cadence on A major, A, C sharp, and E, which is our 5 chord, like we learned earlier. Next cadence, another half cadence in the key of D minor. I guess somewhat of a complement to the previous 2 phrases that we heard. We start things off with another 6 chord. So we've started the previous 3 phrases with 6 chords. There's a clear symmetry going on here. B flat, F, D, and D is B flat major. This D is a chord tone. This G is a non-chord tone, but I think we've seen non-chord tones that hint at possibly the idea of another chord happening here. Like in this case, it could be G minor 7 over B flat rather than B flat major, but it's largely negligible because the chords are similar. We then get A, E, A, and C sharp. That's A major, which is our 5 chord. Same progression we've started the previous 2 phrases with. Well, actually, not true. We went from 6 to 2 here, but we started the second phrase here with 6 going to 5, so similar to the second phrase. And the fact that this is an even number phrased, right? This is phrase 2, this is phrase 4, and they're similar to one another. Probably there's probably a commentary to be made about the form of the chorale here based on the harmonies going on. So after this passing seventh of the bass, we get F, A, and D, which is D minor in first inversion. This B is a non-chord tone. We have some melodic minor here, D melodic minor, E, G, C sharp, and E. This is C sharp diminished in first inversion, and if you've seen this pattern, just like you saw here, you know what chord's going to come next. We have D, A, D, and F, which is our tonic triad in root position, D minor. Then we get D, B flat, E, and G. That's E minor 7 flat 5 over D, or 2, 4, 2. This C sharp is a non-chord tone. This A is a non-chord tone. It's an anticipation, but when we take all of the notes, C sharp, A, E, and G, that's A7 over C sharp, which is 5, 6, 5, resolving where we would expect it to. And we get similar thing going on here. Instead of getting D in the bass here, however, we have E in the bass. That might be a typo actually, because the phrases are largely similar to one another. I wouldn't see why Bach would make this choice here, so take that with a grain of salt. Regardless, the chord resolves where we would expect it to. F, A, E, and F, this E being another suspension. Bach loves that suspension over the D minor chord. We also get it over A here as well, but he loves it over D minor. We see it in a lot of his D minor works, so we'll just say that this is 1-6, and that resolves to A major, which is our 5 chord, A, C sharp, and E. Looking ahead, we have our first non-half cadence in this chorale. It is a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor, but I do think we are in the key of F major to start things, just because it sounds that way to me with the B flat here. A, B flat, C just sounds like 3, 4, 5 in the key of F. We have 5 going to 1 in the alto, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the key of F here. So this does feel like a direct modulation to F to me. However, you could analyze this in the key of D minor as well if you don't feel like there was a departure. The melody could be 5, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? I guess being the main counter argument, or just argument against what, I guess counter argument made sense there because I'm arguing it's an F, but either way, this sounds like F to me, so I'm going to analyze it in F. We start off with F major, F, A, C, and A. It's our tonic triad. Passing tones in the bass, A, C, F, and A, seeing kind of a similar configuration here to what was happening in the first phrase. So this is just first inversion, no need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Another passing tone in the bass before we get C, C, F, and A, which is, I guess technically speaking, taking the chord and putting it in second inversion, but really what we're looking towards is the C major happening on the next beat. So this E is a non-chord tone, this D is a non-chord tone, then we get C, C, E, and G here, which is 5 in the key of F. So after our 5th chord here, we have some chromaticism in the bass, C natural, C sharp, and D. And we also have this B flat going on here. So if we look at the aggregate of all of the tones going on, we have C sharp fully diminished, C sharp, B flat, E, and G, which would, I guess, if we're in the key of F major, this happens to be one of those cases where I feel like the modulation is happening after the secondary dominant. So this would be 7, 7 of 6, and we would expect that to resolve to 6, and in clear Bach fashion, he has this 9/8 suspension in the alto again. He does that a ton in D minor, D, A, D, and F, or D, A, E, and F, but the E, of course, is a 9/8 suspension. That's our, sorry, not our tonic triad. I'm thinking ahead here. It is our 6th chord in the key of F, and in the key of D minor, it's our tonic triad. And as we're getting ready for our perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor, we get A, D, and E. Gets a little scrunched here, but the D is what's happening on the beat. The C sharp happens after the fact, but we know that A major is being implied, which is our 5 chord. This G is a little passing 7th before we get D minor, D, F, D, and D. 3 roots and 1/3 spelling this time. Looking ahead, I think we have the most interesting cadence, even more interesting than the cadence at the end of the chorale, or in contention for it, because I think we have a half cadence here, but there might be an argument to be made that it's a plagal cadence as well. I'm making the argument that it's a half cadence. Maybe it's just based on the way that I hear it. It probably is just based on the way that I hear it. You probably hear it clearly. For me, there was some ambiguity here. I was analyzing it in G major. The phrase starts off in G major pretty clearly, but it moves to C major. So after this D minor chord, it's pretty interesting that we get a direct modulation to G major to start things off. I suppose you could make the argument that we're in the key of C major as well, because this G major idea is only a couple of beats long. We start off with E minor, E, G, B, and G, which is our 6th chord, right, in the key of G, sorry, did I say G minor? I meant G major. So starting off a phrase with 6 again, that's something that Bach has done previously in this chorale. And then we have F sharp, C, E, and A. And I'm making the argument that this C and this E are both functioning sort of as double suspensions, right? We've seen this before, like here, for example, where the inner voices are prolonged, and really what's going on is on the and of the beat. I feel like that's exactly what's happening here. So this would be some type of D major chord. In this case, it's in first inversion because the F sharp is on the bass. That would make this C another accented non-chord tone as well. And then we get G major, G, B, D, and B. Tonic triad in root position, or so we think. We get F natural passing in the bass afterwards here, which indicates to me that we're moving to the key of C major. I would call this 5 of 4 if we were staying in the key of G, but we're not. We're moving to the key of C, so I'll just call it a tonic, which is effectively how it's being resolved to, but the passing 7th in the bass indicates to me that we have moved to a different local tonic, and that's C major. So G is now our 5, and that resolves to C major in first inversion, E, G, E, and C, 1/6. Looking ahead, we have D, C, F, and D, kind of similar to this phrase here, our second phrase, where we go from 1 to 2, and then 5. We have an incomplete 2 chord here, but I do see the majority of it, D, C, F, and D, which is D minor 7 without the A, and that's okay. They can be incomplete, but I tend to not mark incomplete chords on the and of the beat. When they're on the beat and the majority of the chord is there, that's fine, but as we're closing in on a cadence as well, we expect Bach to get contrapuntal, so we have to extrapolate as much as we can. This G is a non-chord tone, this B is a non-chord tone, this G is a non-chord tone. That makes this a G major chord, which is 5, and then we get C, C, G, and E, which is our tonic triad C major. This E is a chord tone, this A is a non-chord tone, and it gives us a bit. I'm going to use an arrow here because get a little squished. If I don't, we get a little bit of a passing 6 chord here, which I feel has the potential to be significant in terms of breaking up the texture of a bunch of tonics and dominant chords just oscillating between one and the other. On this beat we get C, F, A, and D, which is a 2 chord in third inversion, 2-4-2, D minor 7 over C, 6 going to 2, that's a good sign, another normative progression. And when the B resolves down by step, and we get this anticipation here in the alto, we get B, F, G, and D. That's 5, 6, 5. We've seen this progression in the past a couple times. And then we finish the progression on C major, this F being a 4-3 suspension over the bass. And by the time the tenor resolves, the bass changes E, E, G, and C, so I'll mark that as 1-6, and then we cadence on 5, G, D, G, and B. It sounded like a plagal cadence to me for some reason, but with the absence of F sharps, and now that I'm looking at the phrase in the big picture, and there's a bunch of F naturals in there, don't know exactly why it sounded like a plagal cadence. I'm going to go ahead and erase that. I guess I just needed to talk myself through it. I don't really talk myself through it when I'm analyzing on my own. I'm quiet and thinking about it, so being able to verbalize it helps a lot. If you're struggling with your own analysis, maybe try that too. And it looks like we have a long phrase here, but I just forgot to add some fermatas. Sorry, this fermata goes over the C sharp. My bad, sometimes they don't make it into the score, but the audio recording at the beginning of the chorale should reflect that there is a phrase ending here. But we are looking for another modulation to D minor here. Just like we modulated a D minor earlier, this time we're doing it from C major rather than A minor, so some symmetry going on as well. And we end in a half cadence, of course, as most of the cadences in this chorale have been half cadences. We start off with, it looks like an A minor chord, A, C, E, and A, which I think you can make the argument that is what chord's happening here, but I think this is actually, this E is an accent and non-chord tone, and it's this F sharp that's most interesting to us, and that would make this F sharp diminished, which would be 7/6 of 5, which coincidentally is the same way that we sort of started the previous phrase. And then afterwards we would expect a 5 chord, which we get, but because I don't think we're in the key of G major at this point, we're in the key of C major. Unlike here where we're coming from the key of D minor and it sounds like a stark contrast, and it feels like we start in G major, and there's less of an argument to be made that we've seen C yet, whereas in this context we came from the key of C and G is being tonicized, so that's what I feel like the main difference is, even though we're just starting the phrases the same way. So we would expect that to go to 5, which it does, G, D, G, and B, G major, passing 7th in the bass, and then resolves to C major over E, E, C, G, and C. That's our 1/6 chord, passing 7th in the melody before we get F, A, F, C, A, and A, which is our 4 chord, F major, and coincidentally, I believe that is our gateway to the key of D minor. It is our 3 chord. We're starting to see C sharps here, as well as, actually, we don't see any B's for the rest of the phrase, so it's really just this C sharp that makes us feel like we're moving towards the key of D from like a visual standpoint. So here we have E, C sharp, G, and A, which is A7 over E. That's 5/4-3, and then that resolves to D minor, D, D, F, and A. Sorry, it looks a little scrunched, but It's okay, there's nothing happening on the next beat, fortunately, so I don't have to write anything there. E, D, E, and G, a bit of a E minor 7 flat 5 vibe in passing, but there's no flat 5. The chord's not intact and it's happening off of the harmonic rhythm. I tend not to mark those. We then get F, A, D, and F, which is just taking the chord and putting it in first inversion. We've seen this same figure a couple of times over the course of the chorale. Another passing tone on the bass, and then we cadence on A major, A, C sharp, and E with this 4-3 suspension over the bass. Looking ahead, we end the chorale in a half cadence. We've only had one perfect authentic cadence. It's in the center of the chorale, or near the center of the chorale. Maybe there's some golden ratio stuff going on here. All in all, ending in a half cadence is pretty interesting, and this phrase here, I think, meets the most interesting phrase criteria here, just because after talking through this phrase here, it wasn't as interesting as I thought. I was just mishearing. But we're seeing something very similar to the phrase here at the beginning of the second system, where we start off in D minor, we move to what sounds like F major to me, but it very well could be in the same way that this could be in D minor. This entire phrase could be in D minor, but it's interesting to see a departure from D minor to an F major sound world, just to go back to D minor. Of course, they're relative keys, so you know, it's not as interesting as if, say, Bach went from D minor to A minor and then back to D minor, but still F major feels like the local tonic in that's being referred to before going back to D minor. And in the last phrase, to see a mid-phrase modulation like that, that's pretty interesting. So starting off the phrase, we get F, A, D, and D. It's D minor in first inversion. This A is a chord tone. We then have E, G, B flat, and C sharp. That's 7, 6, 5, C sharp fully diminished over E. And if you've seen this progression in the past, you know what's coming. This E is a chord tone, this G is a chord tone, and we get D minor in first inversion, D, F, A, and D. And because I believe the middle of the phrase is an F, I do believe this is our gateway to F, and it is our 6th chord. Passing tone in the melody here, or sorry, in the alto, and it's actually a B natural, which is kind of interesting, which makes me feel like, what's going on here? Why does that B natural feel important? It's very possible that actually, you know what might be happening here? It could be 6, but it could also be the same way that this 7, 6 of 5 is operating. That's exactly what this could be like, 7, 6 of 5, the same device that was used here at the beginning of the penultimate phrase, because that B natural actually seems a lot more interesting. So what makes this an accented non-chord tone here, and this one just a regular non-chord tone? I feel like it's just feel and the overall flow of the harmony in terms of where I think the modulation is happening. Here, a modulation isn't happening, it's a tonicization. We're still in the key of C even after the fact. Here, we're moving to the key of F, and the B natural feels more coincidental, at least to me. All in all, the chord is still there, and I'll put it on the page because of it. We then have C major, C, G, C, and E, so it is resolving where we would expect it to. Passing tones in the upper voices before we get C, C, E, and G again. No need to reanalyze. This B flat is a passing 7th before we get A, C, F, and A. It's our tonic triad in first inversion. That kind of gets turned into root position here as well, F, C, F, and A. So we don't need to reiterate the Roman numeral, but I will mark the fact that the chord is entirely intact. We then have C, C, F, and G, which is implying like a 5-7 chord, or actually probably just a 5 chord because the 7 is so brief. I suppose I could just put it in parentheses there because it's part of the texture, I suppose. And then we go to D minor, D, F, E, sorry, D, A, E, and F, of course, with that a 9/8 suspension in the alto over the D minor that Bach loves so much. This is our 6th chord in the key of F, but right before our final cadence, it's going to turn into our tonic. This B natural is a non-chord tone. This D is our chord tone. This A is our chord tone. This C is the little passing 7th before we cadence on E major, E, G sharp, B, and E, which is our 5 chord. So definitely, like, I don't want to say polytonal because that's not really what's happening, but Bach is definitely blending keys together. There's some tonal blending for sure. Other than that, some of the takeaways here are the chromatic bass line and the harmonies that it creates. Where was that here? C, C sharp, and D. We also have some distant modulations, right? D to G, or D minor to G, that is, which is, they're not adjacent to one another on the circle of fifths. Tonic is 5 of 4, so this idea of G major being our tonic here, and then being 5 when moving into the key of C. Sometimes we don't even see this used as a modulation technique. Bach just goes 5 of 4 to 4, continues in the key of before what was being tonicized, but here it's being used as a tonicization technique. It's pretty cool when he does that as well, but it's the same general gist of what's going on. We have mid-phrase modulations as well, where we're, say for example, going from D to F and then back to D at the end, or we start the phrase in one key and end in a different key. That's what I mean by mid-phrase modulation. Some double suspensions going on. We had one here. We have some more throughout the middle of the chorale, one snuck in over here as well. Typically it's the inner voices, but there are 2 voices that are being suspended at the same time. They resolve at the same time or near around the same time, and they reveal what the chord is most likely being implied as. And the fact that it ends in a half cadence, that's definitely atypical as well. The vast majority of the chorales end in authentic cadences. But with all that being said, that's pretty much all I had to say about today's chorale. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of the chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Feel free to hit the notification icon as well so you can be notified of my daily upload. And you could also like the video if you enjoyed the content. It helps me out a ton as a content creator, and it means that more of my videos are going to be seen by more people. That means a bigger community, and that's an awesome thing for me. On that note, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.